I didn't research.
So not quite, not quite, but did it in my nice, polite way.
Hey, Mark.
No.
You tried. You tried.
It's coming up.
I was loyal as loyally as I could be.
Thank you. What'd you get?
So did John end up having to do it? Did John end up having to do a hearing as well, or?
Oh, I had that.
Is it in our office?
Yeah, you have that.
Wait, I have this. More likely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Okay, you guys ready? Ready? We ready?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. At this time, we're going to convene the Board of Elections. And before we start, I'm going to ask everyone that's in this room this afternoon to be respectful. Be respectful of everyone who's speaking. Do not want to hear any outburst. We live in America where we should be unified, respect each other's opinions. We'd ask everybody, please refrain from any kind of an outburst. I don't anticipate any. We have a court reporter here because this is an official hearing. So as she's translating, she cannot have people talking over each other also. So thank you for that. We're going to have speakers address the board members. Please do not address the audience. Do not engage with the audience when you're up here at the podium. Address the Board of Elections. Again, please do not talk over each other. Also have an announcement that there was an executive session held on November 4th to receive legal advice related to today's hearings on challenged absentee ballots. This time can have approval of the minutes of that meeting on November 4th. Of the public meeting.
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I'll second.
All fair side?
Aye.
Aye. At this time, we're gonna have public comment on agenda items only. Excuse me, I have a cold, so I'm having a hard time talking. When you come up to the podium, please keep your comments brief. There are a lot of people here. We want to hear from everybody. As a chairman, when I have meetings, I do not limit people to 3 minutes. You took the time to come down here and voice your opinion. So as long as you're being respectful, we want to hear from you. And I've always been liberal in that aspect. So if you come up and speak, try to keep it brief, but I'm not going to keep it to exactly 3 minutes. So at this time, do we have any public comment on agenda items only from the audience? Yes, sir. Well, please introduce yourself. Yes. And state where you're from, and appreciate having you here. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. Excuse me, before we start, Forrest, do you have anything you want to start?
Nothing up front, no.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, sir. Your name?
My name is Gregory Smith. I'm the resident of Williamsport and Lycoming County. And to the Board of Elections, I'm not here on any political agenda. My son, Benjamin Smith, was born here in Williamsport. He is a U.S. citizen, and for the last 10 plus years, he has had to live overseas for his job. He teaches English as a second language to various countries. He's lived in Thailand, he's lived in China, and currently he lives just north of Barcelona. My understanding of the law is that U.S. citizens who reside abroad are allowed to vote in federal elections, and he has maintained a legal residence in Pennsylvania at my house. He receives mail there, not only junk mail, but also Internal Revenue Service and other investment accounts and that type of thing. And every 2 years, he does come back to this country and he stays with us, and as well as visiting family in other parts of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So I appreciate the board looking at this situation, but understand also, and I'm sure you do, that there are actual people involved with this. And I wanted to speak on behalf of my son.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Yes, please come up. Afternoon.
Afternoon. I'm Keith Rule, 102 Goldie Lane, Old Lycoming Township. I had to write this down so I didn't forget any details, so I'm going to kind of read it and we can go from there. My wife and I operate a farm in Old Lycoming Township that has been in our family since 1898. Our 26-year-old son, Eric, grew up on that farm, stands to become the 5th generation to own that farm into the future. As a kid, he rode his bike around the place, learned to hunt small game, and process them into delicious meals. Helped mom and dad around the farm with chores as they came up, and enjoyed fishing with his grandmother on Rose Valley Lake and Bowers Pond. He also learned to cut firewood with a chainsaw and a belt drive buzz saw. He learned how to take care of livestock. He learned how to repair farm machinery, operate car repair, all that kind of thing he learned on the farm. He also stacked hay bales in a 90-degree dusty barn hayloft and didn't whimper one bit to do it. As a student in the Williamsport Area School District, he excelled academically and participated in various music groups in the school. As you know, our music department is excellent in Williamsport. He loved it. After school, he participated in the Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts in the community. And into high school, he grew very fond of the drum line and the drumming and the percussion, joined the Marching Millionaires, and excelled and participated all through his graduation at 2016. Following graduation, he went on to college. His drum line and drum percussion interest retained, and he joined the Drum Corps Associates groups, the Hawthorne Caballeros and the White Sabers from Dansville, New York. He financed those ventures by working summers at area restaurants. This wasn't a handout from mom and dad. Upon entering college to pursue a mechanical engineering degree, he continued that interest and went on, as I said, to join these Drum Corps Associates groups, graduating with high honors. He then had a mechanical engineering degree, applied for a position, and started a career in the alternative energy industry in Norway. This was in 2021. He has lived in Norway since that time. He currently remains a citizen of the United States, a registered Lycoming County voter, and retains a Pennsylvania driver's license with a permanent address at our farm. He pays income taxes in Norway and to the United States. He has voted in the United States consistently using the absentee ballot system while living in Norway. The attempted action by this group to nullify my son's absentee vote due to his location overseas is illegal per the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens of Absentee Voting Act, 52 U.S. Code, subsection 20302, state responsibilities, and is a clear example of attempted taxation without representation. This group is attempting to eliminate voting rights of U.S. citizens granted by law under our Constitution, the same Constitution that affords this group the right to come in and present this challenge today. Not only is this attempted action illegal, it is unfounded, it's ludicrous, it's despicable, and it's actually obscene. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
So at this time, what we're going to do is switch directions here a little bit. Anyone who has comments regarding a child or a relative overseas, we want to hear from them after we hear from Ms. DeSalvo as she presents her case. We're gonna have her present her case first, and then we'll take public comment at that time to follow up. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you reversed the order because there has been a complete mischaracterization of what I am attempting to do. First of all, there's no group. It's me as an individual, and I'm not attempting to nullify the votes of anyone. It's not ludicrous. It's not obscene. All I am attempting to do is to get the Lycoming County, sorry, I'll address over here, the Lycoming County Office of Voter Services to comply with the law and register voters. I heard the last gentleman talk about his impressive son, and he said he's registered in Lycoming County. He is not registered in Lycoming County. That is absolutely not true. And that is the reason that I'm here. So there have been a lot of mischaracterizations about, and I blame the press for this. The first thing I want to say is, before I get started, I just want to remind you that it is the county boards, it's the election boards that are given the task of conducting elections. So it's not the unelected bureaucrats from the Department of State, it's not the DNC, it's not the RNC, it's not the ACLU, it's the county boards, the people who are closest to the people in the community that were entrusted with conducting our elections. And the second point I want to make is my candidate won this week, right? So I could have withdrawn these challenges and I could have received my $720 back. But none of what we have been attempting to do over the course of the last 4 years has been about our preferred candidate or about our preferred party. All we've been trying to do is to fix the issues that we see with regard to election integrity. And if we see a vulnerability in the system, or if we see that the law is not being followed, which is the case with this issue that I'm raising today, we're attempting to fix it so that people have confidence in our elections in Lycoming County. It's my understanding that representatives from the Department of State took to the press this week and they called my challenges that I have filed bad faith challenges. My personal information, my private home address was not redacted and was sent out on these challenges. And as a result, we were subjected to threats of violence. And I had police cars patrolling my neighborhood. District attorney's offices in 2 counties were involved. So I just want to say these challenges have not been filed in bad faith. They've not been filed to disenfranchise voters. They've not been filed to keep anyone from voting. They've been filed because of what we perceive to be a very serious vulnerability in Lycoming County. We are allowing unregistered, unverified, and unknown applicants to vote in our county. And not all Pennsylvania counties are conducting their elections in this way. Some are following the law. And I'll get back to that in a few minutes. Now, I didn't know with your new setup, this is my first time in the new building, whether I would be able to show slides. So I made copies of all my slides. And I have 4 copies. I don't have one here. So maybe.
I will share. Thanks.
There, yeah. All right, so section 3146.8F of the election code in Pennsylvania allows any person to file a challenge to an application for an absentee ballot for any of the reasons provided in this act. Challenges can be made under the election code on the ground that an applicant does not possess qualifications of an absentee elector, according to section 3146.2B. So what are the requirements for one to become a qualified elector in Pennsylvania? The qualifications of an elector are outlined in 25 PS section 2811, which states every citizen of this Commonwealth, 18 years of age, possessing the following qualifications shall be entitled to vote at all elections, provided he or she has complied with the provisions of the act requiring and regulating the registration of electors. So the first requirement to be qualified to vote is registration. So what do Pennsylvania registration requirements say? Well, section 1301 says no individual shall be permitted to vote at any election unless the individual is registered. Section 3146.1G provides guidance for qualified absentee electors, which are what we have here, and states that qualified electors can be people who are outside of the United States, provided that said electors have been registered to vote. Our Constitution in Pennsylvania speaks to this issue, and I don't have a slide for the Constitution. I added that in right before I came over. But Article 7, Section 1 of Pennsylvania's Constitution says every citizen shall be entitled to vote, subject, however, to such laws requiring and regulating registration. Pennsylvania has a residency requirement, as many states do. So what does it say? It says that any person who intends to remain outside of Pennsylvania permanently or indefinitely is not eligible to vote in Pennsylvania. That's according to section 2814 of the elections code. And that's where UACAVA comes in. So the last gentleman spoke to UACAVA. I am absolutely familiar with UACAVA. All right, so UACAVA is the Uniformed and Overseas Absentee Voting Act. And what it does is it permits members of the military, their family members, and other non-military citizens to vote in our elections who meet the requirement to vote but for the residency requirement. And so this is federal law, trumps state law. So this statute allows people that don't fulfill the residency requirement to still vote if they are otherwise qualified to vote in Pennsylvania's elections. Our challenges have nothing to do with military votes. So I want to put that to bed because that's something the press loves to run with. These challenges pertain to a small set of overseas voters referred to as federal voters. So what is a federal voter? According to the Pennsylvania Department of State, they've coined this term federal voter. It's a US citizen residing overseas who's entitled to vote for federal offices under UOCAVA. If you want to vote under UOCAVA, you use the federal postcard application. And there's some choices. And I showed you the application. It's on page 5. And if you look at the 4, I have to put my glasses on for this. There are 4 sections. One says I'm a US citizen living outside the country and my intent to return is uncertain. If you check that box, that's the subset that are referred to as federal voters. And those are the ones that form the basis of the challenges that have been filed today. If you look at the top of that federal postcard application, it says voter registration and absentee ballot request. Lycoming County is processing the ballot request, but we are not registering the voter. Both are required under UOCAVA. So why are they doing this? Why is Lycoming County not registering these voters? Well, the Department of State, the bureaucrats in Harrisburg, have characterized these individuals as federal voters. So in their system, they give them an F designation. And as you can see there, they put unregistered next to federal. And then our Department of State issued contradictory guidance to all 67 counties, essentially saying, don't register these people. Guidance is not law. Okay, so on June 24th, 2 years ago, we had Jonathan Marks, who runs our elections in Pennsylvania with Al Schmidt. We had him in Judge Lindhart's courtroom across the street. And he was asked about guidance that's issued by the Department of State. And he admitted that guidance is just guidance, that county election boards control the election processes in Pennsylvania. And the guidance is just like it states, it's not law, it's guidance. So what does the law actually say? So if you look at UOCAVA, I just want to point out first the heading of UOCAVA. Registration is the first word. So what does UOCAVA apply to? The registration of overseas voters and voting by absent overseas voters. The Department of Justice agrees with us. So if you go to the United States Department of Justice website and you go to UOCAVA, frequently asked questions, this is the question. What rights does UOCAVA give me? This is the answer, according to the United States Department of Justice. If you are a qualified voter protected by UOCAVA in elections for federal office, the state in which you are qualified to vote must permit you to register to vote. The Pennsylvania Department of State has issued contradictory guidance on this. So they've sent out guidance that says don't register, but I've highlighted there on guidance provided, it says overseas, UOCAVA requires that states allow overseas citizens to register. And if you look at the actual language of UOCAVA itself, so it's 20302, subsection 2, it says each state shall accept and process with respect to any election for federal office, any otherwise valid voter registration application and absentee ballot application. And Lycoming County, as I said, we're processing the ballot application, but we are not processing the registration. If you look up above, it says each state shall permit overseas voters to use the registration procedure within the state. So what's the registration procedure? Well, now we have to go to another federal statute. So the Help America Vote Act sets the minimum requirements for the administration of federal elections. HAVA requires that every state have one single, the language of the statute says a single uniform, official, centralized, interactive, computerized, statewide voter registration list that contains the name and registration information of every legally registered voter in the state. The list is to serve as the single system for storing and managing the official list of registered voters. And the next line is what I really, really want you to pay attention to, because what it says is this: all voter registration information obtained by any local election official in the state shall be electronically entered into the computerized list. So every state has to have one centralized list. Pennsylvania has such a list. It's called the SURE system. And we know that because of 25 PACSA section 1222A. So we've got these federal postcard applications, and these individuals, some of the parents are here in the room. Those, those were filled out and those were sent in. The problem is local election officials are then required to enter that information from those postcards into the SURE system. And that is not happening. These challenged voters are not registered in the SURE system. And so I have a thumb drive for you that we downloaded last night so that you could check this out for yourself. So this is the names of all of the registered voters in Pennsylvania. It's current as of yesterday. Okay, and what I would invite you to do is check the names of all of the 71. And I had 72 because one person had 2 addresses and received 2 ballots. That's why I had 72. But 71 is the number of challenges as of right now. And if you check all 71 of those names on our current voter registration file for Lycoming County, you'll find that not one of those names is listed. So they're not being registered to vote. So just as a recap, federal voters are only eligible to vote under UOCAVA. That's what gives them the ability to vote because they don't fulfill the residency requirements. So they're allowed to vote using federal law and they're eligible to vote in federal races. UOCAVA requires the states to process these voter registration applications from these UOCAVA applicants. And then the Help America Vote Act requires local election officials to enter all of that information, all voter information, all voter registration information into the SURE system. Lycoming County is violating federal law by not doing this. They are not doing what is required for voter registration. Under state law, it is a felony to allow someone to vote who is not registered. It's not the voters that are committing the felony, it's the election officials. So 25 PA section 3523 says, any election officer who permits any person to vote at any primary or election who is not registered in accordance with law is subject to a fine of up to $15,000 and up to 7 years in jail. Although the Office of Voter Services may contend that registration is not necessary because overseas voters are being entered into a ballot request system, this is not the same as registering a voter. This does not comply with the provisions of UOCAVA or HAVA, which requires a single computerized voter registration system, because essentially what we have now are invisible voters. And I will tell you, because my private information was released, I talked to a number of these individuals this week. They think they're registered to vote, but they're not registered to vote. And they are required to be registered to vote under federal law. There's no question that many of these applicants will be determined to be eligible, but unless and until they are properly registered, these people are ineligible to vote under federal and state law. Other counties are following the law and they are registering these federal-only voters despite the guidance issued by the Department of State. Bedford, Carbon, Clarion, Elk, Franklin, Fulton, Indiana, Jefferson, Montour, Perry, Snyder, Somerset, Warren, Wyoming, and even Allegheny County. They are registering these federal-only voters, but we are not. All we want is for Lycoming County to join this list. These voter eligibility issues can be easily resolved by just processing the voter registration applications that have already been received. We just want Lycoming County to follow the law so that we can have trust in our election processes.
Would you like to respond?
So the matter before the Board of Elections is to decide whether to sustain or reject 71 challenges that were filed against absentee ballots cast in the November general election. There are only 71. There were 72 voters named in the challenges, but one name appeared twice. That voter only appears in the SURE system once. So I do not know what the source of the data was that these challenges originated from, but that voter only appears in the SURE system one time. But before turning to these challenges, there is one related topic that needs to be addressed. It was brought to my attention back on election day that
the person who filed these challenges received at least one threatening phone call in connection to them, and that is completely unacceptable. I said that the person who filed the challenges received a threatening phone call. Now, I know many people are experiencing strong emotions about the election outcome. I recall in my office the strong feelings expressed by people who came in, people on the phone after the 2016 and 2020 elections. But we cannot, as a country, let every presidential election cast a 4-year-long shadow across our lives over everything that we do. It's not healthy. And it is definitely not okay to resort to intimidation, threats, or violence in a civilized society. That's why we're here today, to hear and decide these challenges in a civil way. So I am sorry for what happened to the person who filed these challenges. It should not have happened. So these 71 absentee ballots, they were cast, if I can get this to work, I might be too far away. There we go. They were cast by US citizens who currently reside overseas, but who last resided in Lycoming County before they moved abroad. In the world of election administration, we refer to them as federal voters because they stated on their application that they are uncertain if they will return to the United States. Now, they must still submit an application and identify themselves. And we process those applications when they come in as both a registration transaction, a voter registration transaction, and as a ballot request. It's actually two separate processes that we have to follow for each one. And that's true whether it's a military voter, an overseas voter who intends to return to the US, or an overseas voter who is uncertain if they intend to return to the US. This is a copy of that application, the federal postcard application. Those are the different boxes that the voter has to select one to identify what bucket they fall into. And the green arrow there points to the fourth box down. I apologize, it's probably difficult to read, but it says, I'm a US citizen living outside the country and my return is uncertain. If they submit a federal postcard application where they've checked that box, then they are a federal voter. Now, all 71 of these voters are covered by a federal law that's been referenced called the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, which guarantees the right to vote to military voters and their families, and also to US civilians who reside here in the United States and who later move overseas. That is why all of these challenges need to be rejected. This is a long-standing federal law since 1986, and it is crystal clear. US civilians who previously resided in the States and who later move overseas, they are guaranteed the right to vote for federal offices no matter what, based on wherever they last lived stateside before they moved abroad. States and counties are required to permit these voters to participate in federal elections, and other counties have already dismissed similar challenges. They haven't been sustained anywhere. Here's the relevant section of federal law that defines these people as covered overseas voters who are eligible to vote for federal offices no matter what. Putting the legal language another way, if the last place where a person lived before they moved abroad was here in Lycoming County, and their only impediment to registering to vote is that they no longer reside here, then we are required to permit that person to use our voter registration system and our absentee balloting process to then vote for federal offices. The federal law does not distinguish between overseas voters who reside abroad indefinitely versus those who reside abroad only temporarily. The voter registration and the absentee balloting requirements of the Pennsylvania Election Code are not relevant to this federal statute. So these applicants, they submit, sorry, still trying to get the slide here. There we go. So they submit a federal application for their ballot that includes their identification numbers. They are entered into the voter registration system for tracking purposes. And they are assigned a voter registration status in the SURE system as a federal voter so that they do not appear in the poll books. This is also why federal voters do not appear when you are looking up voter records at, for instance, the Pennsylvania Department of State, because they are not registered voters. That fact is not in dispute. It doesn't matter that they're not registered voters. They are covered overseas voters under federal law because they lived in Lycoming County before moving abroad, and they retain the right to vote for federal offices. They do not by default show up on reports. They do not show up in poll books because they are not registered voters. However, it is possible to run a report out of the SURE system that includes these voters if you know what to do and how to do it. Now, setting these ballots aside would violate a federal law. It would deny federally covered voters their right to vote. It would immediately expose the county to lawsuits that it would lose and which would consume vast quantities of taxpayer dollars in the process. But there's more to this issue than legalese. We've seen some of that already. These challenge voters are people who grew up here and who lived here. That's why they're still voting from here, because of their connection back to this county and to this community. This is the last place they lived in the United States before they moved abroad. Many of these voters still have family and friends here in this county. Some of those family and friends are in this room today. Those ties might one day bring these voters back to the county if we do the right thing today. We need to affirm their right, guaranteed by federal law, to vote for federal offices and thereby participate in this nation's ongoing, majestic, sometimes messy, always unfinished project of self-government. That's why the challenges must be rejected. Now, part of preparing for today's hearing was to provide notice of the challenges to the 71 affected voters and give them an opportunity to respond. When the board thinks it's appropriate, I do have some of their statements here that would need to be read into the record. But I just want to reiterate one last time before I conclude here. These voters are in the SURE system. And it's been suggested that the remedy, I take issue with the argument that a remedy is required, but there is a remedy that we need to just register them. Now, usually in election administration, there's a tension between security and transparency. Sometimes when you're talking about an idea, a policy, sometimes you have to balance those values. Sometimes you can't always have both. But in this case, the suggestion that we should take our voters, our federal only voters who are coded in the SURE system with a special status to be able to track them and just register them, that would undermine both transparency and security at the same time. You cannot just register, quote unquote, these folks alongside everyone else, or they would get lost alongside all the other registered voters in the county. You wouldn't be able to pick them out anymore. It'd be needles in a haystack. They need to be assigned a different status in order to differentiate them from regularly registered voters, to differentiate them from civilians who say that they intend to return to the US, so that we can send them the correct balloting materials. Because when we process the voter registration transactions and then the ballot transaction, the balloting materials they receive are tied back to the status on that application and their voter registration record. So if you just register them, you're going to have registered voters who really should be federal voters getting full ballots when they should only be getting federal ballots. So you're losing both transparency in the form of the ability to find out which ones are which, and security in the form that now you've got people getting balloting materials that they should not be receiving. If the complaint is just about the name that's on the status, maybe there's some objection to the fact that they're called on hold federal voter. Maybe there's a desire that nomenclature should be different. Well, that is the statewide uniform method for tracking federal voters. If the state decides to change it to something else tomorrow, they want to call it registered federal elector, that's fine. whatever name the state chooses to adopt for the status doesn't matter. Arguing about the nomenclature is just splitting administrative hairs. What matters is effectuating the goals and aims of the federal law that covers these voters and guarantees their right to vote for federal offices. Now, the part of the process that I was prepared for was going through the legal argument about Uokava, going through, the fact that the federal law supersedes the state law. The part I wasn't prepared for was sending notice to all of these folks that there would be a hearing in a little over a week. I sent the notices back on the Saturday before the election. And I wasn't prepared for the flood of overseas phone calls that I took from panicked voters over that weekend before the presidential election. I was in the office on Saturday after I did those notifications, and the phone just kept ringing. And you can tell when they're overseas calls because the caller ID shows up and it's this kind of potpourri of digits compared to a regular phone number. So I picked up one call and then there was another. And once it started, it was funny. I actually could not bring myself to leave after that because, they're trying to reach anybody they can on the weekend before the election, trying to understand what's going on. So it was clear these voters were desperate. They felt powerless because they were thousands of miles away on the Saturday before the election, and they're just trying to talk to someone to understand what's happening. So I stayed there, kept picking up the phone, taking their calls. It was from everywhere, all these countries that they were from. I must have taken 30 overseas calls from these folks over the course of several hours that day. But sorry about the bill, by the way. And I just listened to what they had to say.
Does Act 88 cover that?
I don't know. I'll have to look at the eligible expenditures. So I spent most of that Saturday afternoon before the election listening to their stories about growing up in the county, living here, why they moved away. One person who served in the military 21 years, another person fell in love with someone in another country and got married. One person works at a religious institute in Israel, but they all still think of this county as a second home. And they want to still feel like a part of this community, this county, this country, despite that remoteness. They were angry. They were upset. And many of them were offended by the challenges against their right to vote. And many of the voters did submit statements responding to their challenge ballots. So when the board thinks it's appropriate, I can read some of those into the record.
Okay, Forrest, I do have a question. And,
Yes.
Their commissioners, do they have any questions? So it seems to be the main question is whether these people were properly registered.
Right.
And then Ms. DeSalvo's form package she passed out here says federal voters' intent to return to the United States is uncertain. They are permanently or definitely overseas. The question is asked, this form is a voter registration application, which you had up on a slide. She has a copy of it here, and ballot application. She asked the question, why is the county skipping the first part?
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
It's not accurate. It's not being skipped. And I think we have to be careful about use of the word registration too, because there's certainly a legal sense when we use the word registration if we're talking about whether they are a registered voter or not.
Can you go back to that slide?
The application.
Yes.
There's a legal sense of registration when we're talking about whether they are a registered voter in Pennsylvania or not. And there is also I'm pressing the buttons.
No, it's not working.
I'm probably
There it
too
is.
far away there.
That's
Okay.
the one.
But there's also the colloquial sense where we might talk about, registering them in the sense of processing an application. We might be quote unquote registering them in the system, but we're not making them a registered voter because we can't, because they're not eligible to register to vote in Pennsylvania based on the answer they gave.
Okay.
So when we get one of these federal postcard applications, if they say their return is uncertain, it's still getting processed as a voter registration transaction in the Shore system.
So each one of those voters that is questioned gets this card, sends it back, and they have that section where you have the green arrow checked. You have that document.
We don't send out any absentee ballot to anyone in this county unless they did an application of some kind. And in the case of these voters, they all did one of these and they all checked the box saying their return is uncertain.
And you have those on file.
Yes.
Okay.
So when we get one of these, we approach them in some ways similarly to any voter registration application because we data enter the information they've provided and we look for a matching record in the voter registration system because we don't want to create a duplicate record by accident. We want to try to link it to a record that exists if there is one. Now, in some cases, if somebody has lived abroad for a while, they may already be a federal voter. So we're just linking it to the existing record as a new application. Sometimes there are no changes that need to be made, in which case the only thing that is left to do is process it as an absentee ballot application.
Now, once you process that, it doesn't get placed on the voter rolls, or does it? Because
It does not, because they're not.
Why?
So again, we've got to divide between, do they go into the voter registration system? Yes.
Okay.
But they are not a registered voter in Pennsylvania because they're ineligible to be a registered voter under state law. So what you're able to do, if I'm sitting in front of a voter registration terminal, I can look around and by default, it's not going to show these folks. But there is an option you can select to say, yes, I want to search for also the unregistered federal voters who we've put in there in the past. And then you can absolutely find them. I can call up their record just like any other registered voter record. And they're in there because at some point in the past, we did register them, for lack of a better term.
Okay, so once they do that, then they're registered as a federal voter,
Yes,
and then they get a separate ballot, which looks like this. Is that correct?
that's right. They get a different ballot that has only federal
And I'll be glad to
offices.
pass this around to the audience, if you don't mind, pass that around. So that the overseas ballot, that's
Yeah.
what people get once they do that. So you
Well,
pass
here,
it
the overseas ballot, the only three things they could vote for was president, senator, the Casey McCormick, and the representative, which was GT Thompson versus Zach Warren. Those are the only three things that they could vote for.
And it is not possible to send an absentee or mail ballot of any kind to anyone unless they are first in the voter registration system. It simply isn't possible. Because in order to issue a ballot that has a barcoded label, you've got to have their record in there in the first place because we attach that application to their record. We use that to generate a specific barcode that ties back to their application, their record, so that when we get a ballot back in the mail, we scan that barcode and it identifies exactly whose it is. So it would not be possible to send out the ballot without having had them entered into the system in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, you can, and anyone wants to ask Mr. Lehman questions, Karen, feel free to also, but go ahead, Bill.
There's 5 categories on the voter registration.
Yes,
Absentee ballot, correct?
yes.
Read the third one for us, please.
I'm a US citizen living outside the country and I intend to return.
Okay, and read the fourth one.
I am a US citizen living outside the country and my return is uncertain.
Going back to the third one, if I check the third box, what's the difference in how my form is processed as opposed to if I check the fourth?
If they check the third box indicating they are a citizen who intends to return to the United States, then they are eligible to register to vote in Pennsylvania. They would be registered in both the colloquial and the legal sense of the term as a registered voter in Pennsylvania. And the absentee ballot that they receive would contain all of the offices.
It'd be the same one as I get sitting when I live in Williamsburg.
That's correct. Yes.
So that what we're talking about on this form, aren't we, are multiple types of voters.
Yes.
So like number 1 and 2 deal with people who are in the military or merchant.
Correct.
And number 5, the last one deals with folks who live outside the country but have never lived in the United States, therefore aren't registered.
And
Eligible, I mean vote.
And yes, they would not be eligible to receive any ballot at all.
So going back up to the title of the document, voter registration and absentee ballot request, would you agree that this is a multi-purpose form?
Every one of them requires 2 passes because you have to ascertain whether it needs to be processed as a voter registration application first And then after that, you would process it as an absentee ballot request.
Multi-purpose, I mean, there are different types of potential voters.
Oh,
who
yes.
Use this application,
Yes, and that's true as well. Yes.
some of whom under category 3 are required to register because it's a voter registration form. Under number 4, they're just required to ask for an absentee ballot.
That's right. Yes. And we have currently a little over 100 voters that fall into the federal voter category who are in the SURE system based on past applications. And I can absolutely run a report of them. And every one of them is in there because at some point in the past, they did one of these. Now, some of them become one of these later on. So they could start out as a duly registered voter in this. In fact, a lot of them do. They're living here, they register to vote, they move abroad, and then later they may submit one of these and that causes their status to change. But they started as a registered voter. Others may only start out as a federal voter. If they moved abroad when they were younger, before they were eligible to register right here in Lycoming County, they may fill out one of these later on when they're older. Some people move away when they're 8, 9, 12 years old, but they're still eligible as well. But every one of these, we received one of these FPCAs and entered it into SURE, and they are absolutely in there.
Mr. Levy, is there more than 71 overseas voters? Since the sheet.
No.
So this is
Well,
all of them?
Well, I don't have the exact number. I know that there are a little over 100 that exist. I don't know exactly how many might have requested a ballot for the election. Overall, all of our UOCAVA voters, it was a little over 200. I think it was 235, but I don't have
Can you
the
break
complete
down
breakdown.
how many are military or merchants as opposed to how many are just
I know about these 71.
what I'm getting
But,
to is,
yeah.
are there more voters that they did not object to are citizens living overseas, not associated with military merchant marines?
It's possible. It would be up to a challenging party to decide who they want to challenge and to issue the challenges. Yeah,
I understand that, but I just want to know more who they did challenge.
it's possible. Yes. Yeah.
Lyman, obviously, it's my first time sitting on the Board of Elections. So if you could I got a kind of a two-part question. You could clarify what SURE is, and then just for
Yes.
my clarification, what you're saying is they are anybody that's on my list here in front of me is a registered voter. The reason they're not registered in the system easily found is because then that would allow them to be all the votes of Pennsylvania instead of just the federal vote.
So the SURE system, when I use the acronym, it's SURE. It stands for the Statewide Uniform Registry of Electors. That is the statewide voter registration system. All the counties have access to it together. So we just call it the SURE system. All of these voters that are on your list exist in the system because at some point in the past, they submitted one of these federal postcard applications. They identified themselves as a federal voter. And so we enter them into the system, not as a registered voter in Pennsylvania, but as a federal voter pursuant to UOCAVA for tracking purposes. We want to be able to differentiate between the voters who are only able to vote for federal offices and from a registered qualified elector in this county. And so that's why they're assigned a different status that's called on hold federal voter. That's why we're able to run a report where I can tell you that we have 110 of them or 111 of them because they're coded differently and I can run the report. If we didn't code them that way, if we just registered them, you wouldn't be able to run a report and find them at all. They'd just be in there along with everybody else.
And therefore they'd get the full Pennsylvania ballot.
Yeah, they would get a full ballot when they're supposed to only get a federal ballot. We want to make sure we are following the law. We want to honor their right to vote for federal offices, but we don't want to inadvertently permit them to vote for more than they're entitled for. And the status they're assigned in the SURE system of on hold federal voter, is the statewide uniform method for identifying them. All the counties do that. And that is why we're able to make sure that they get the ballot they're entitled to, no more and no less.
Oh, yes, sir.
Incredibly trivial that just by either intending to return or you're not certain to return makes such a big difference.
I mean,
I know you didn't make the form. Just
Right.
like-
I didn't make the form. I didn't make the law. But I'm a, yeah.
That's the first thing I thought when I saw
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But it's, I guess it's trivial, but at the same time, the state election code does establish what are the qualifications to be a registered voter,
Right.
and intent to return to the United States is one. And so that's where you're required to, read the federal statute against the state statute. And in what respect does the federal statute override the state statute? It's complicated. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
As simple as, for example, I'm a college student and I know I'm gonna be back after graduation and I don't want to miss the chance of electing a state and local person because it's gonna personally affect my life because I'm coming back in a couple of years. Whereas if I'm married to somebody and I live in Spain or Great Britain and I know I'm probably not gonna come back very near the future. In fact, I don't know when I'm gonna come back. I don't care who's elected in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or in the county of Lycoming. It's not going to affect my life whatsoever. So that's my take on it. Is that a correct take?
Well, when the applicant completes the FPCA, that part of that, I mean, the very first thing they have to do is ascertain which of these boxes best applies to their situation. And some of that is evaluating their own state of mind. What is the state of mind that best reflects, what category they're in? That's up to the applicant. They have to make that decision. And then based on the decision they make in that section 1 at the top, that influences how we process it as a voter registration application. But it also influences how we process it as an absentee ballot request. Because as it's already been pointed out, and apparently, what seems like a trivial difference between do they intend to return, do they not intend to return, it affects how they're registered in the shore system. Are they entered in as a registered voter, or are they entered in as an on-hold federal only voter? And then on the absentee ballot, when we get to that second transaction, are they getting a full ballot to vote for state and local offices as a registered voter? Or are they getting a federal only ballot where they can only vote for federal offices? So it does have, consequences downstream, implications, but it depends on, their own state of mind and what they think best fits their circumstance.
Oh, yes, sir. Back there, Mr. Pryor.
What assurance is under number 4 do we have that American citizen changes their citizenship to whatever country they're in? Then, we don't know that. I mean, do they become automatically a dual citizenship person? Or does their citizenship in our country get nullified?
Well,
If they do get nullified, how can we check if they continue to send the card over saying I'm a citizen? How do we check that?
well, they're in nearly all cases, their citizenship wouldn't change. You don't lose your American citizenship. In fact, there's very few countries in the world that even permit dual citizenship. I think there's only 4 or 5. It's not a very large number. But that would be a legal question that the applicant would have to ascertain. We're going by the information they present on the application, which does include identification numbers, date of birth, so that we can ascertain who they are against the information we already have on file. And they are swearing or affirming that the information presented is correct. And they're under the same penalty of false statements on that application as anybody else filling out a voter registration form would.
Or does each one of them do their social security number also?
They can do a social security number, or they can do a driver's license. Some of these folks, like the military voters, they may be deployed stateside or still, serving stateside, and they may have a Pennsylvania driver's license number. Some of the overseas civilians still have a Pennsylvania ID number, driver's license number, but More of them will tend to have a social security number that they'll report.
Next. Sir? Yes.
Oh. Yeah, I think you might have answered my question. This isn't you have to have some sort of proof that you're a US citizen to be able to get this.
Well, this federal application, it's available pretty widely because all of these folks need to be able to access it and use it.
I could say,
So-
take 10 million of these, send them to Mexico or Dubai or just Iran. And have all those people fill out the form, send it in.
Well, you could do a couple of those things, but everybody sending one in is gonna have to provide date of birth and an ID number that matches to their name when we bounce it against,
What do you mean by
Records.
ID?
well, the social security number, the driver's license number.
Those are pretty.
Well, no, well, it's not though. They have to it's not just, is this number valid? It's, is this number and this number and this name, do they all match together? So it's like if you buy something online, you know, you have to have a credit card number, you have to put your name, you have to put the expiration date, and then there's even a 3-digit security code. You can't just make up any one of those things or the whole transaction
So you need
fails.
some sort of valid ID to get it valid.
Those ID numbers have to correspond together to a person.
Many of those 71 were previous voters when they were in Pennsylvania.
71.
All 71?
Yeah, I mean, this was the last place where they lived before they
Okay.
moved abroad, or else they would be registering somewhere else. You know, if the
Okay.
last place they lived in the United States was in Dauphin County, they would need to go down there. But they're actually giving us, this isn't the whole application, but that item number 2 there, that's actually where they have to state the last address where they resided in the United States, and that has to be their Lycoming County address.
Is it possible that they lived in Lycoming County, were not registered, moved overseas, and then decided they want to be a new voter? But their
Yes.
last address was in Lycoming County, or are there any of those?
It's possible for that to happen.
Well, especially if they went when they were 12.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's possible for that to happen. They would be covered the same way as somebody else.
Okay.
But in more of these circumstances, you can go back through the history of the record and see there was some earlier point in time where they actually were an active voter. But yes, there would be some circumstances where that would be the case as well.
Forrest, this is directed towards the gentleman's questions about the identification. So when somebody submits this application, they're actually validating that information in the system.
Yes. Yeah, it has to correspond to it, the combination of name, date of birth, identification number, you know, either the social number or the driver's license number. They all have to correspond together to a person. That's what we're looking for.
In our voter registration system.
Yeah. And that's exactly why, you know, recently when stories ran shortly before the election about a county finding a large number of problematic voter registration forms, it's because they got a lot of forms, started looking at them, and they got a lot of ID mismatches all at once.
Or any of the 72, after they filled that out, and you check the Shore system, not in the Shore system.
There would be, it would not be possible to send them their absentee ballot without them first being in the core system. So
Okay.
they're all in there.
So they're all verified and they're in the Shore system.
They all did one of these applications and they are all in the Shore system. They just don't show up in a default search, because the last thing we would want would be for one of these folks to show up in a poll book at a precinct, or for them to show up on, you know, a walking list. Someone going door to door isn't going to find them because they're not there. We don't want them to show up in voter registration statistics, because then it's reporting an incorrect statistic.
Because they're not eligible to vote PA.
Yeah, those reports, those lists, those are to report out registered voters. If you include federal voters in there, we would be getting a completely different set of criticisms alleging, you know, your voter registration numbers are off. You know, so that's why they're not there. There is a way, when you go into the Shore system, when you do a search, if you set the criteria correctly, you can say, yes, I want to see these folks. Show me the federal voters who are not registered. I need to see a list, or I need to find this person to look them up. And then you can absolutely find them and look at them. Just like any other voter who's in there.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Lehman, are you saying then that everybody who is labeled a federal voter has been vetted and is fully eligible to vote in this jurisdiction?
They have all completed one of these federal postcard applications at some point in the past. And they indicated that they were a US citizen living abroad whose last place where they lived in the United States was here in Lycoming County. So we have one of these for every one of them at some point in the past. They don't get into nobody gets into the voter registration system without an application. Either the voter registration form that you folks might see if you came in to get one, or by doing Motor Voter, or by doing an online registration, or if you're a military or an overseas voter, by doing one of these. There's a paper trail for every person that is in there.
Yes. Prior.
Access the shore system. And what happens if the person dies and no one's notified?
So access to the shore system is restricted to authorized users with credentials. So there's a process with the state in order to create a user ID so that someone can get in there. So it's limited to county election staff to be able to get in there. We have the ability within our own county to be able to process transactions, make changes. We do have visibility into records in other counties, but we can't do anything to them. We cannot, all we can do is read them. We cannot change them or add anything or delete anything. That's right. All of those lists come out of the voter registration system. So people come to us to run for a local office. We can print the walking list. We can print the street lists. The voter, some of you request voter export files. We do an export. Federal voters do not appear on any of those by default because they are not registered voters in Pennsylvania. And I think that's where some of the confusion may be coming in, because you're looking for them, you can't find them. But if we included them, it would be inappropriate because they are not registered voters. It would be possible, yes.
Bill?
Of course, if you looked at 25 Pennsylvania Consolidated Statute, Section 3502. I'm familiar with that.
I've looked at a lot of stuff in there, but I don't know by number, Bill.
Defines Pennsylvania voter as an overseas voter who is not registered to vote in this Commonwealth, but otherwise satisfies the voter eligibility.
Yeah,
defines voter as that.
Yeah, there is a lot of overlap between, there's a Pennsylvania state version of UOCAVA that's called UMOVA, and it overlaps pretty significantly with UOCAVA, but not 100%. And that's where you get like the division between how you treat someone who says their return is uncertain, because there are some other states that treat the answer to that question differently, but it is absolutely a state by state decision. You know, how much do they want their state statutes to align with UOCAVA?
Sir, you've been patient. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I've been wanting to say this a long time. It's a good meeting. I've been voting, I'm in the United States Marine first. Citizen of Lycoming County my whole life. I've been voting since 1968. And 3 commissioners here and this man have a lot to do. These meetings, they didn't happen then. They're happening now. Because one criminal threw doubt into the system. One criminal. 16, 20. That's where we're at now. It's sad. People, you work hard, commissioners, and this man, there's people like him, he's doing one. There's thousands of him around the country. A man like him was called by this guy one time. And this man, I was in his office, he does a good job. That's about it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
If there's anyone here, if you've been where I've been in my life, like 0.5% of the US population have seen what I've seen. That's why I'm so emotional. Now, if there's any recount this time,
A recount is not democracy.
Sir, we're
No
not
one
talking,
came to my,
we're not talking.
not this time, last time.
Yeah.
That's not democracy. No one came to my door and asked me.
Okay, do you have any questions for Mr. Lehman? Okay, thank you,
It's not
sir.
his fault.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Stroman.
You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
If you ever need any help, give me a call.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna be fighting the day I don't breathe.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stroman.
Yeah.
Do any NGOs at this time or in the past, have they had access to the short system?
To any, what?
NGOs, non-government organizations.
I would highly doubt it. The only, I guess if you want to call it coordination, I only know this being on the outside. So I would not want to speak for the details of this, but I'm aware that Department of State has made it possible for outside groups, political parties with the correct vetting to be able to put their own versions of online voter registration, online mail ballot applications on their own websites, to have their own electronic modules for that. And then as they collect data, it's provided to the state, and then the state would then put it into the voter registration system. So as far as I know, there is no direct connection. However, there has been that arrangement that's been possible. And I think at some points in the past, some parties, some outside groups have availed themselves of that.
Commissioners, could you get a clear verification on that?
Yep, absolutely.
We have a question.
Yeah, one second.
Yeah, one of the holes I see in this bill, talking about driver's license. Have to get citizen to get a driver.
Well, the driver's licenses, they are, for folks that have lived abroad for a long time, even if they used to be a registered voter, those driver's license numbers or the ID numbers from PennDOT are issued for life. So they still would follow them all the time.
Yes.
I've never heard of that. No. No. And by act, you would have to mean that, are you talking about fabricated? I mean, I've never received, well, I can tell you in 10 years of doing this job, I've never received a single complaint alleging, I've never received a single complaint alleging a fabricated identification number on an application.
Question for you, Forrest, is
Yeah.
the SURE system, which these voters go into once they are verified, check from the application that's the registration form that's sent in and check with the SURE system. How often does the state purge or scrub the purge system or the SURE system?
Well, they're not purges. It's voter maintenance that we do.
That's maybe a better word, voter maintenance. How often do they look at the
Yeah,
SURE system?
whenever you conduct voter maintenance, there has to be a basis for it in law, and it's conducted at the county level. The NVRA, the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, establishes what types of voter maintenance need to be conducted and when they can be conducted. And all the counties comply with that. So we are looking at doing programs at least once a year where we're receiving change of address data from the post office. We're receiving data from other states. We are flagging records where there are long periods of inactivity so that eventually those can be canceled. And after every federal general election, there is finally a cancellation that takes place of anyone who has been inactive for 2 federal general elections. So the NVRA is very specific about what voter maintenance needs to consist of, what needs to be done, but also what can't be done. And the tricky part of that is the only correct way to proceed is to do exactly what is required, because if we conduct voter maintenance that isn't permitted or at the wrong times of the year, we can be sued for, they'll call it purges, they'll call it canceling people, disenfranchising people. Conversely, if we don't conduct the voter maintenance that we're required to, then counties can be sued for, letting the voter rolls get out of date and not keeping up with the data. So we're doing exactly what is required. When we get the data that comes in, we act on it, we send notices. The voter registration system is like a river. You know, it changes every day. And it is always some amount behind what is going on in people's lives, because the problem is people, you know, they get married and change their name without telling us. They change where they live without telling us. They die without telling us. And we have to keep up with that.
I just want to know how often the state requires the counties to maintain the shore system.
Yeah, we absolutely engage in that activity. We can only do it in the valleys in between elections. Because when you get within 90 days of an election, you enter what's called a quiet period, where you are not permitted to engage in any voter maintenance activity. And that's broadly defined as anything involving large numbers of voter records. If you receive an individualized report, you can still do something about it, but you can't take actions based on just data on a spreadsheet and try to cancel records or, you know, mark records inactive within 90 days. We engage in this activity over the summer. So in June, July, August timeframe, we also do some of that activity in January, February, but we're always trying to play catch up, you know, with what people are doing. And that's why people will go out to polling places and they'll say, oh, I'm still, you know, registered under my maiden name. Or, you know, we have had people on election day who, if they only vote once every 4 years, they may still be registered at an old address because they never updated it. And, well, you know, we're always trying to get those records up to date.
We'll take one or two more questions and then for Forrest.
That went out in the knocked on doors for this election, and we have a list of 100 names, and we get those 100 names, and we find 5, 10 people that were told, oh, they moved. The trail was crushed, so nobody lives in it anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did we bring that to you and let you know? I mean, I
can.
obituaries for those people when they're dead.
Yeah. Well, so for deceased voters, we cancel every day based on obituaries. We also cancel based on notifications we get from the State Department of Health, which come in every about 2 weeks. We've approached the legislature in the past because the problem in the election code is it says you're only allowed to use these 2 sources of data to cancel a record of a deceased voter immediately. We've approached legislators and said, hey, give us access to more data types. I would love to be able to use Social Security Master Death Index, because that's nationwide. We would like to be able to use funeral home data, because a lot of people don't run traditional obituaries anymore. They're expensive. We would like to be able to use out-of-state death certificates. But right now, we're not permitted to use any of those things to immediately cancel a voter. We tried to get the legislature to run a bill. As complicated as you think elections are, lawmaking is even more of a black box. Don't ask me to explain it. They had a bill and then we never saw it again. But that's one thing, deceased voters. We do provide opportunities. If you ever see folks who you think moved away, absolutely let us know. We get some of that information passed on to us by poll workers after the election, because they'll make notes in the poll book. They have a page where they can actually make notes to us about individual records if they know someone moved away, because we'll flag that and we'll send them an address verification notice to try to start the process with them. But otherwise, we're waiting to get the data from the post office.
Thank you, Forrest.
Yeah.
We like to this time open up to public comment for anyone that would like to come back up and speak, especially if the parents are here or any sibling or relative that's here from any of the overseas ballots. Or a question. Yes, Karen, go ahead.
Bedford, Carbon, Clarion, Elk, Franklin, Fulton, Indiana, Jefferson, Montour, Perry, Snyder, Somerset, Warren, Wyoming, Allegheny County. All of these counties are registering the federal voters. So clearly it can be done. So
Sorry, can you rattle those off again?
yes. Bedford, Carbon, Clarion, Elk, Franklin, Fulton, Indiana, Jefferson, Montour, Perry, Snyder, Somerset, Warren, Wyoming, and Allegheny. And Forrest said a couple of different things. First he said they were registered, then he said they're not registered, then he said they're on hold federal voters. Uwakava and Hava both say they must be registered. And he's indicated he'll open it up to lawsuits. Well, what are all these other counties doing? Clearly, they're able to do it. And on this point of people asking, is this information, do we know that this information is being vetted? I just want to tell you that on August 29th, 2023, so we did a lot of right to know requests, as you know, following the 2020 election. And one of the things we asked for were copies of all the mail-in and absentee ballots. So we received all of these from the 2020 election. Many of them were incomplete, lots of information missing, okay? I sent a right to know request to the county. This is what it said. This request seeks any and all follow-up communication, including but not limited to emails, letters, or text messages sent by Lycoming County Office of Voter Services between March 1st, 2020 and November 3rd, 2020 to UACAVA voters for incomplete UACAVA applications. No records exist. So when they're coming in and they're incomplete, that's also guidance that's issued by the Department of State. Don't attempt to match these. It's a different thing when you are just checking in an on-hold federal voter status than actually registering these people on the shore system so that they are visible. We should not have unregistered, invisible voters, and other counties have figured out how to do it. How do we know that? So I can walk you through the process if you want. How do we know what other counties are doing? We applied to access to the daily statewide mail and absentee ballot file. We receive notifications every time it's updated. You can filter to the county, and then you can see that F designation. You can see how they've been designated in the system. And then what you can do is you can get the full voter export, which we purchase regularly. You can check all of those federal voter individuals and see if they're registered in the shore system, and they are. And all those other counties, they are. You can see that F designation. So clearly other counties have figured out how to get this done, but Lycoming County has not.
Can I just throw something in as devil's advocate? You routed the counties you routed off. There were 15 of them. You have 67 counties in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
So that means there are 52 counties that aren't doing it that way.
And the reason is because the unelected bureaucrats at the Department of State have issued guidance, inconsistent guidance to these counties saying, you don't have to register these people. And they also have issued guidance that says you don't have to verify the identity or eligibility of these voters. And so, and just to give a little bit of a side, we just brought a lawsuit on behalf of 6 congressmen because of that guidance, because our Department of State tells all 67 counties, don't try to identify who these voters are. And they get their ballots via email, by the way. So they submit these postcards, and yes, we have postcards for all of these. They submit it. It doesn't matter if they're filled in or not completely. We know that. We have them. From 2020, we know they're not. And then we send them a ballot via email. And then it comes back and we count it. And the Department of State tells the counties, don't attempt to identify the eligibility of these voters to vote. We brought a lawsuit. So guess what the Department of State says? Okay, whole courtroom filled with attorneys from the Department of State. They say, this is a county issue. Take it to the county. Okay, so here I am. Here I am in the county. So the county officials are the ones that are given the role of conducting our elections. And that was done intentionally so that we can avoid the unelected bureaucrats who are playing politics down in Harrisburg.
Origin. One second. They're mailing these ballots, correct? They're not voting by email.
They get their ballot via email. They can.
Their balloting materials are emailed to them, but their voted ballot must be returned here. Now, the applicant can choose how they want to receive their ballot. They can choose to receive their balloting materials by email, or they can choose to receive it by regular mail. And that would be the same if they were a military, an overseas voter, any of those categories, they could make that decision. Because in some cases, the foreign mail is not great. That's why they have the option to receive by email.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Overseas voters here in Lycoming County are not military or mercenaries, 71. They're more than 71.
This is a subset, and it's just, we included all of the individuals that are in that subset that checked that box that says that they have uncertain intent to return to the United States. Those are the only ones we're talking about. And we included all of those. So it's all 71. Registered. We want the votes to be counted. We just want to make sure that these individuals are eligible to vote in our elections. That's it. Register them. The registration process is what allows you to see if there's a match. You put that social security, the people who send these in think that they're engaging in that process. And Forrest says they're, what does he call it? He said that they're matching them, but it's not through the SURE system. They're not being entered into the SURE system. They're not. And we know that other counties are, because we can see them. But Lycoming County, you can't see them. They're invisible in this county.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's true, Forrest, what you just said, that they're not.
Well, I think he's gonna have a comment first.
Yeah, Bill,
Go
you
ahead.
comment.
If you want to answer the question, go ahead.
Well, as I explained earlier, every one of these records, I can find and pull it up in the SURE system. And actually, I can also go in and find their FPCA because we enter it into their record. I can find their absentee ballot application. It's all in the SURE system. When I go to run a report, you have to make a decision, do you want to include them or not? And by default, they're not included, but they're absolutely in there. And I can take anybody down to the office and pull a record up and say, there's one of our federal voters. I can pick any name off that list and pull them up because they were put into the SURE system. Because when they submitted that application, that manually data entered their information in order to say, this is an application. Is there a matching record? Yes, there is. There they are. I can find them.
Forrest, is there a reason why 15 counties do it one way and 57 do it another way?
I don't know the basis for that allegation. I'm not aware of how you could do that any differently and not, as I said, undermine both security and transparency. You can't just register these folks because if they had an active registered status, well, now you just made them a registered voter. Now they will appear in a poll book. Now they will appear on a walking list and someone will go to that house, as we've seen happen in the past. A canvasser will go to a house and say, why is this person listed as living here when they don't actually live?
And they would accidentally receive a ballot,
A full ballot.
A full ballot.
State and local office.
so they would be able to vote on local offices when they're not entitled to.
That's right. There is a compelling reason why we have to draw a distinction between those folks based on what they put on the application.
Right.
We have to be able to draw a distinction in the voter registration system so we can find them and differentiate them and issue them the correct balloting materials. I don't know the basis for alleging that 15 counties are doing something differently, but somehow they were able to find these folks to issue the challenges, so they can't be that invisible.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, hold on. Well, he's at the podium.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let him speak and then we'll ask. Okay.
Quick comment.
Yeah.
Apparently, there are 15 counties that are alleged to be able to register these voters and have them appear on the SURE system. Could not Forrest be directed? I heard two of those counties that are extremely local, Snyder and Montour. Could not Forrest be advised or requested on your part to contact the voter services in those two counties and find out how they get them to appear? Already on my to-do list.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
I
Thank you,
have a
sir.
letter, which I think I provided to Mr. Bayman, and I thought I provided to you from the U.S. Department of Justice addressing this. And I think the important part of the letter is where they cite the Pennsylvania statute, but I don't think you should lose sight of, which is in 25 Pennsylvania consolidated statutes. And as I already said earlier, if you look at 3502, they define voter. And they define voters in different ways. And if you look on the second page, they'll at the very bottom in footnote number 3, they'll talk about that specifically. But if you look at how they define voter in Pennsylvania, is a voter, a covered voter under this law is an overseas voter who is not registered to vote in this Commonwealth, but who otherwise satisfies the voter eligibility requirements of this Commonwealth, including residency requirement.
That's the definition of a voter under Pennsylvania law, who's not registered, which is consistent with federal law, consistent with what Forrest is saying. But there's no requirement to register.
Can I ask Bill a question?
Yes, ma'am, please.
So Bill, have you reviewed the September 26, 2022 guidance from the Department of State that says overview of UMUVA? That's the
Nope.
statute you're reading from.
Nope.
So on page 1, it says, note, UMUVA does not cover federal voters. Federal voters are covered by UACAVA alone. And it's UACAVA that says register these voters. And I gave you the full statute for UACAVA so that you could see. I highlighted, I was trying to keep it short for all the people here. But if you look through it, it's replete with, you must register these voters. These voters must be registered. They're entitled to be registered. And so please review the statutory information. And it is the federal law that applies. Federal law supersedes. It's UACAVA and HAVA, and both of those require registration. Not some sort of, we check it on a system.
Trust the board.
If I may.
Yes.
I would just point out, they're bureaucrats, like she said.
Yes, Jeff.
Yeah, just one more question. And I think it's worth looking into, because I think what the big question is here is, are these full residents or have they been residents of the county? But I think it's important these can be a legal non-residents that green card holder in this country, have a social security number and a driver's license. So how does this process go beyond that vulnerability of someone that maybe in another country that has a green card fills one of these out with a social security number, take it to the bank? Alas, you can have a social security number and a driver's license on a green card in the United States, but if you're not a citizen. So I think it's worth, again, for integrity purposes, not for fighting, not for
All right.
finding out, one candidate over the other.
All right.
Let's just make sure this isn't a vulnerability. And I
Right.
thank the commissioner, everybody here, because it's important we all come down here and flesh this out.
What?
Sir.
I agree with that, and I think Forrest has some things on his to-do list to
Yeah.
check with other counties. I think this registration absentee ballot request form, that needs cleaned up by the state. Is that
Federal.
or federal form? I think that needs to be cleaned up, because we can see issues with that too. So, but these are all things that can be addressed and presented to the authorities to look at, make the changes if they want to, because it's out of our realm on those things. Yes. Yes, Fred.
My name's Fred Holland. I live in the city of Williamsport. I'm an attorney, but I'm not here as an attorney. I'm here as a family member of one of the persons whose vote has been challenged. Mrs. Salvo started by saying she's not trying to challenge votes, but her first sentence in the challenge that was sent to my stepdaughter says, "I am submitting this challenge to an absentee ballot application." So if you grant the challenge, whether she thinks it's Forrest's mistake or whether she thinks that there's something wrong with some of the 71 people, their votes aren't going to count. And as the commissioners, we've gone far afield from what the challenge is. And you need to turn down the challenge, because otherwise 71 votes won't count that should.
Thank you. Any other people that like to be heard? Any other people that want to be heard on behalf of the relatives that are in question? Yes, ma'am. Please come up. And then Karen will have you speak again. I'd like to hear from those individuals.
Somebody's ring.
Thank you for being here.
So my sister is one of the people that was challenged. I'm not an attorney, so I can't really speak for the law, but I think I have a very unique perspective to share. I was also one of the absentee voters for the 2020 election. For many years, I lived in the UK. And I want to say that it was always a privilege to vote. I always ticked the box that said, I'm a US citizen living abroad, living outside the country, and my return is uncertain, because it was uncertain, but I did come back because, as Forrest said, many of the people that are voting abroad now and are being challenged today, this is their home. This is where their heart is. My sister and I, we grew up in Williamsport. We went through the Williamsport School District. I was in marching band. She joined color guard with me because she likes to copy me. you know, I could, and I could speak for my sister's intelligence and her right to vote and what a capable, amazing human being she is. But at the end of the day, she's a US citizen, just like me. The only difference between us is that she isn't here. She isn't here to defend herself. And I think that her right to vote should not be questioned, considering that she was born here, grew up here, and has a deep love for this country and its future.
Thank you. Anybody else, please? Okay, Karen?
I just want to say one more thing, and I won't even take the time to go up. So Fred Holland read the beginning, and we did use the statutory language that's required to challenge. But if you read down, it says the reason we're challenging is because the applicant is not registered to vote and therefore is not eligible to vote. So our eligibility requirements in Pennsylvania require that individuals be registered to vote. And that's all we want. We're asking for the county to process the information that's there, put it into the SURE system so that these individuals are not invisible to the system. And that's what UOCAVA requires, and that's what HAVA requires.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask the gentlewoman a question?
Yes.
Ma'am, Mr. Lehman asserts that these people are in fact in the SURE system, that if you simply do a default search, however you want those people, if he gives you directions as to what keys to push to find these people, will you drop your challenge?
No, because what Forrest
But they're in the
Lehman said,
system, so you.
what Forrest Lehman said was, these people are not registered to vote. That was a quote. That's what he said. She said they're not registered to vote. They said they're checking the information in the system, not
Please address us. Okay, that's okay.
And UOCAVA doesn't have some secret
Karen?
squirrel file.
Address us, please.
UOCAVA says these individuals must be registered. Otherwise, valid individuals must be registered. HAVA requires local election officials to register these individuals.
So if I could clarify your response, please, you're telling me if you are logged into the system and shown how to find these people in the SURE system and verify that all 71 people are in fact in the SURE system, you will still continue to challenge this, that they aren't registered?
We have access to the SURE system, the type that individuals,
Is that where you got the
that
list?
political campaigns are capable of getting. You know, so we've got politicians that run in federal
You didn't answer
races
my question.
in Pennsylvania. I'm trying to get to it. We have federal politicians who run in our Pennsylvania elections, and they don't know who these people are. These people are not visible. I mean, maybe election directors sitting at their desks and the people down in Harrisburg, but this is not what people, when they're allowed, when they can see the SURE system, which we're supposed to be, there's very little transparency when it comes to the election processes. That's what we've been trying to work on over the past 4 years. But we are allowed to see this piece. These people are invisible. And they're not supposed to be. Under UOCAVA and HAVA, they're supposed to be registered into the one single uniform computerized list that we have the ability to access and see under the law.
Isn't that, hold on, and I'm just, isn't that one uniform list the SURE system?
That is the SURE system.
And they're in the SURE system.
Forrest Lehman said, he said both ways. So one, he said, these people are not registered. He said that several times.
But they're in the SURE system.
But they're not registered in a way that anybody can
Well,
see them.
didn't you just say something about they're not registered, but they're eligible to vote? Isn't that what that statute that you just said? Yeah.
Do I need to come up?
Yes, could you clarify your statements, please?
Well, I do, one thing I do think is important that Mr. Salvo said in this. He's not debating that many of these people of the 71 would be legally able to vote. She's not even saying any of them wouldn't be legally able to vote. We're dealing with the semantics of what is the definition of registered and which does state law and federal, or does federal law supersede state law in a federal election, which would only make sense because you wouldn't want a state to say, in our state, you have to be 30 years old to vote because the federal law overrides that in federal elections. So we're arguing over semantics and legalese, which is why these people make all the money that they make.
Unfortunately, that's part of why as you said, we're going around in circles a little bit. I can look up any one of these 71 people in the shore system down in my office. Anybody, don't form a long line. But if anybody wanted to come into the office and say, show me, pick a name off the list at random, I'll find them. I'll show you their record. It will say, though, that they have a status that's called on hold federal voter because they are not a registered voter of the state of Pennsylvania. They are eligible to vote in federal elections under a federal law, even though they are not a registered voter in Pennsylvania. But I can find them in the shore system anytime. I could go down there and pull them up now. I could run a report if somebody asked me to. They're absolutely in there. And they had to be findable for someone to be able to file a challenge against 71 of them.
And no
They
one
can't
in
be
the
that
shore
into it.
system that can't vote. Correct.
That's right. Nobody who's not eligible to vote for anything would be in the shore system
So
unless they're canceled.
a concern would be that if you're in one of those 15 counties, you could possibly accidentally receive a full ballot.
Well,
And let me finish.
Yeah.
And you could vote for state offices and even local offices, which would be illegal.
Yeah. If someone is getting a ballot
that'd be
they're not
fraud.
supposed to get.
That'd be fraud.
I don't know the basis for the assertion that 15 counties are doing
Yeah.
it differently. I've never heard of any county doing it differently than when you have a voter who marks that box that they are not certain if they're returning to the United States, put them into the shore system as an on-hold federal voter. I don't know any other way to do it that would be
Right. But if they're
comply
not
with federal and
separated,
state law.
if they're not separated, that mistake could happen.
If I make them all an active registered voter, I have no way to run a report of federal voters. They're going to show up as a registered voter.
But Forrest, are we, and I'm not trying to say you're saying things wrong, but
yeah,
are we using wrong terminology? Are these voters technically registered voters for the federal vote?
So
they're just not allowed to vote in Pennsylvania.
we've got to differentiate between using the word registered with the legal implication that they're a registered voter of Pennsylvania under the meaning of the state election code versus, it's possible, and I've even been guilty of this, you throw around the term registered in a very colloquial sense when you may refer to just the act of taking one of these folks and registering them small r in the shore system so that they're in there so that they're findable. That's not registering them as a Pennsylvania voter. That is entering them into that system so that they can be tracked as a federal only voter so that you can differentiate and that you can then issue them the appropriate balloting materials that they're eligible to receive under federal law.
Could I not consider a federally, I forget how you just said that, federally able to vote, registered to vote in federal
You could.
election?
And I think that's where some of the misunderstanding comes down to what is the terminology that's in use in the voter registration system. Counties don't choose there's a menu of different statuses that are available and we don't decide what they all read like.
So the on hold, I'm just thinking out loud here, to me, the on hold means you're registered, but you are on hold so that you can't vote in your local election.
Yeah, but they're called on hold federal voter, and that language, that terminology is determined by the state. They've listed that as this is the status to assign to a federal voter. So when you run a report looking for them, you'll be able to find them. Now they could change that designation if they thought that was contributing to some kind of confusion, disagreement. Maybe it should read, so they could change it tomorrow and say that they're a federal registered voter or a federal elect. They could change it to anything they want. That's just the words that are used to differentiate between them and a registered voter in the system.
Is everyone who is a registered voter in Pennsylvania, they get the entire Pennsylvania ballot?
Yes.
For their jurisdiction.
For their county?
Yes.
So they're, okay. Yeah, I think Mark's right. I agree with Mark that it's about the terminology, like the word eligible might help in some places, that you're not registered to vote.
Yeah.
You're not a registered Pennsylvania voter, because if you were a registered Pennsylvania voter, you would get to vote on every ballot at every level. So you're not registered to vote in Pennsylvania, but you're eligible to vote in the federal.
Ultimately, it would be up to Department of State to choose to make a change to
To the
how they
terminology.
are labeled, because they are the administrators of the system. We are operators of the system, but we cannot change those words. We can't just pick our own designation for federal voters because that's the only one that's available to us. I've never had any reason to have an issue with it one way or another, but if the state wanted to change it, it wouldn't make any difference to the processes we follow to first, process these applications as a voter registration transaction and then process it as an absentee ballot request. And when I say voter registration transaction, that, where they don't end up registered, but in many cases, with these applications, a lot of them end up as registered voters if they say they're military, if they say they're coming back. So you're still, even a voter registration transaction can result in them being a federal voter, result in maybe some applications that get rejected, but you're still doing them all that way. And it wouldn't matter to us what we call them at the end of the line. It's just, that they have to be called something different from unregistered voter so that you can tell them apart.
Okay, one or two more questions and then we're gonna go
I have
ahead.
a question from Forrest. So you're saying you are processing the voter registration transaction. So when you do that, and you enter them, you're saying into the Shore system, do you get the ping back? Do they ping back whether the social security number matches or the driver's license number matches? Do you get the matching?
Yeah, yes. So each time we're entering the information, and these are all coming in emailed or paper applications or faxed in. So there's no electronic way to do this. You have to data enter their information into application fields. And then you're doing a search to try to find a matching voter registration record. So because we don't want to create a duplicate. If they're already in there, we want to find them in there. And in some cases, maybe there's a change we need to make to update their record. They may give us a new phone number. They might change their party. They might have a new mailing address. So you're ascertaining, are there any changes that need to be made to an existing record, or is this a brand new, again, for lack of a better term, a new registration? But
If it's brand new, are you getting a match from the Department of State? Or is that matching taking place?
we're entering the ID numbers and doing the HAVA check on that application to see if we get a match back. Yes.
Okay.
And then after that is, if it's a brand new registration, and then after that, they would become, a new voter, but they're going to end up being a federal voter if they check that box.
Okay, last question, Carol.
Yeah. Hey, you asked for it. Yeah.
When you have that list, it has Democrat, Republican, it has the D, the R, the NF list. Why isn't there an FO, federal only? And those people kicked out of the system instead of being in the state.
Well, it would be I believe it would be possible to include those federal voters in an export if you asked for it. But most people in that position are not going to be looking for that because they're going to be going door to door circulating petitions. And so having the identities of federal voters is not going to help them if they're circulating petitions for local offices. If anything, it's just going to confuse or frustrate them because they're looking for someone who they're probably never going to find unless there's a sign up saying Sydney, 7,000 miles, you got to go get them. So, yeah.
All the voters of Lycoming County.
Right.
And that's the reason they were in there, then you would know they were registered.
Yes, well, that, and that's a question about system behavior. So by default, I guess the state decided that it made more sense not to include these folks by default because they are not registered voters, and that for most purposes, it's not helpful to include unregistered folks who are in there who are not actually able to vote on those local offices or state offices. And it's especially not helpful to have them show up in poll books, and so for those reasons, by default, when you run reports or print poll books, they're not there. You have to take an affirmative step. And if someone said, well, I still want to see them because it's a presidential year, President, Senate is on the ballot, we want to reach out to those folks, well, it would be possible to, you know.
Well, also, don't you use their last Lycoming County address?
Well, right, that was what I was referring to earlier, that section 2 down there, they have to put their Lycoming County address, that's the address at which they're registered. Well, again, small r registered, that's where they're associated with in the system to
For the
document
previous time.
that that's where they lived before.
So I think that might be part of the reason too, that if they lived there 10 years ago, but they've been overseas for 10 years and it says, Scott Metzger lives at a certain address, and then you show up in a list and they're like, I don't know who Scott Metzger is. He doesn't live here. Then it would cause more confusion.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why, I'm just guessing. Maybe that's why
But
it's not there.
it doesn't change the fact that federal law requires that.
At this time, we're going to call a short recess. We're going to deliberate in a separate room, and then we'll come back and vote.
What
Okay?
about, I do have statements from the voters.
Yes,
themselves.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
I wasn't aware.
I mean, if you think this is an appropriate
Yes,
time or
yeah,
should we?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these are the folks whose ballots were challenged.
Yes.
When we provided them notice.
Yeah.
We had to give them some opportunity.
We had some relatives in the audience. I wasn't aware you had someone.
Yeah, we gave them the opportunity to submit statements
Okay.
because for many of them, this is the only means
If you
available.
want to read those for the record, please.
Okay, and I'm sorry, there are a lot, some are longer than others.
Okay.
So, this,
Forrest,
yes,
if you have paper copies of those, we can append those to the transcript
is that
rather
okay?
than read them.
Is that okay to do?
Is that
as
okay to do
opposed
that,
read
Commissioner?
them into the record?
Okay, we'll do that instead.
As long,
Okay,
I'm not.
Okay.
okay, all right.
Thank you. We'll recess for a short time. We'll be back and make a vote at that time. Thank you. What's that?
No, I can advise them legally and they can announce their decision, John. We're good. We can agree to disagree.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Don't worry, Fred would have kicked me in the butt if I was wrong. Yeah, I knew.
Honestly, I got. I got.
They are able to be located on shore systems. So they're not registered in the traditional sense. They're everyone will see them, but they are well, he says it's. He says that
I have to say, it's
how we're trying to register. So they're all registered. I have to say,
Is there a difference?
because then they will show up. That's why. It's not a registration.
My stepdaughter is. Oh, okay.
So we left one on two.
Okay, we'll reconvene at this time. And would either one of the commissioners like to make a statement before we take a vote?
I'll start, being new at looking at all this and listening to all the information. What I feel I'm taking out of this is if these voters are in the SURE system, therefore they do have the right to vote for the federal offices that they were voting for. They do not have the right to vote for Pennsylvania offices. I guess I'm concerned about the terminology and probably should have a lawyer that's telling me the difference between registered or being registered in the SURE system. So I'm viewing it that in my mind, if you're listed in the SURE system, you should be allowed to vote federal election.
Hey, Commissioner.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm thankful that all of you are here. This is obviously a disagreement, but this is the way we are able to hear these disagreements and settle them is what makes our country great. This election has obviously come and gone, and the vote on this will not affect or change any of those results, but it is something that we may learn from and address and look at these other counties and maybe even with our state legislatures and to move forward. And that's how we improve on the process. And maybe, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, or whatever, we'll have different terminology or it'll be clear, or maybe the process will be a little different. But it takes things like this to make change. And we're happy, like it was calm and peaceful and intelligent. And we want to thank you for that.
If I may add to that too, I do think we can do some homework here in Lycoming County. As the Board of Elections, we'll get our Director of Elections on some tasks to review some things and see, I think Commissioner Messina made a great point earlier. We have 15, they're doing one way, and is it 54 or 60?
52. Yeah,
they're doing it another way. So, it kind of reminds me as the two of us came into office, this county had a big fight with a controller over the same thing. So many counties do it one way and so many counties do it another way. I think if nothing else comes out of this, it gives me the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the election process here in the United States and figure out why some people do it one way and why some people do it another way. We will do that prior to the next election. But I think making a change today is also not very faithful to the people that came out, mailed it in, however they put their vote into Lycoming County, with maybe a practice that they were not aware of.
I want to thank everybody for being here today. Took your time to come down here. Found it to be a very important issue. I've been the commissioner and been through several of these hearings over the course of 5 years. And, one thing I'm pleased about our county is we do have a very good election voters office. Things are done right in Lycoming County, I believe. And I'm proud of that. We do have differences at times, but we always work out those differences. And main thing is we remain friends. It's okay to have disagreements and have civil conversation. And at the end of the day, there's a decision made and you move on to the next decision. And your neighbors, and you can learn to move on and get along. And That's what makes our county great. We don't have that civil discords, that hatred we see across the nation. Which is wrong in so many ways because we're all Americans. I want to thank the 71 people that are being challenged here. They love Lycoming County. They still call it their home. They live in another place, but they still love this county. Still call it home. So I want to thank them for still caring about us, and many of them, like the young lady here she is. She decided to come back. And thank you for coming back. You're right, and we want you to stay here. So thank you for being here, and thank your sister also. That said, it's important that on a federal level, these people are heard. Their votes do count. And I do have concerns about if they were accidentally mailed a higher ballot. You know, if you're in one of those other 15 counties and you're accidentally mailed the entire ballot, those people are voting, not knowing, hey, I'm just filling out my ballot. That's what they mailed me. I'm filling it out. And technically that ballot is inaccurate if that happened. So that could be a case of fraud. And they don't know it because they're filling out what may have been accidentally mailed to them. So it's important that there is a federal system separate from the state system. And, you know, Forrest going to research this further, bring that information back to us. We'll make a decision on that. But they are in the shore system. And that's what we have to go by. They're in that shore system and they're entitled to vote federally. So with that said, thank you again, everybody, for being here. And is there a motion of any kind?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that the testimony of Forrest Lehman I deem to be more credible testimony of Mr. Salvo. I would move to reject the 71 challenges and that the votes be counted.
I would second the motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So carried 3-0. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
One thing I want to add, one thing before we leave, please, one thing before we leave.
Veterans Day is this Monday. And without our freedoms, we wouldn't be sitting in this room if it wasn't for our veterans. If there's any veterans here, please stand. We want to acknowledge you. And how about a nice round of applause? God bless you and have a good weekend. Thank you.